be gentle with yourselves, listen to your body and any needs that are coming up. I will be mentioning a little bit around police brutality, and talking a little bit about the history of enslaved people. So giving that as a heads up. And so take care of yourselves in the way that you need. And yeah, I'm going to begin. I'm going to share my screen, get all my tabs sorted, which is always the hardest part. Okay. Perfect. All right. So hello. Thank you for that intro. I have not had my bio read and I felt very shy about it, but I think it like sums up a little bit about what I've been up to. Um, and so today I really want to talk about this idea of an intro to cyber witch practices and my journey to really understanding what that can be and what that has been so far, which right now was leading me towards this proposal of an embodied ecological technology framework, which is what my work is currently engaged with. And so in order to really understand how I've been thinking about cyber witch practices, I really want to mention what I consider to be one of my first initiations into thinking about this idea of like technology and also connecting it to harm and also connecting it to bodies. And that was around May 8th, 2018, when I tweeted this, which says, "How long will my Black body be watched, consumed, and retweeted after I die?" And there was a lot happening around this moment. I was starting to feel a lot of anxiety around police brutality, but specifically how that was connected to social media, how images of Black death were circulating around. And I was really thinking about why were those images being circulated in that way? And around this time was the death of Stephen Clark, who was murdered in Sacramento, California. And I was reminded of also all the many other videos I had seen, reposted, tweeted, nudged in between selfies on Instagram without warning, without consent. And I was really forced to confront my own death, both impending and this idea of a current death, and also my body and its relationship to images. And also around this time, I was a social media manager who was like forced to be on Facebook way more than I wanted. But the combination of all those things, I was beginning to really think about technology, and became more curious about how it worked, what was the language underneath, how it affected us, and also how we could work with it in different ways. And so became curious. I applied to NYU and entered into the interactive telecommunications program. And immediately I gravitated towards this idea of a cyber witch. And I could talk about that aspect of like, why did I gravitate towards the witch? But I think in essence, that act of naming and claiming was my own form of time traveling, of receiving wisdoms from guides and my future self about who I was to be and what I must figure out. And so once I got there, I began to immediately immerse myself in fabrication, electronics, computation. There's some work I was doing in fabrication, working with lights and electronics, making buttons. And also this in a fabrication class where we had the assignment of working with something that was other than wood. And so I was casting scobies into resin. And I really was finding myself wanting to engage with technology in a way that was at distance from the computer. I spent so much time in design before ITP and was curious about what other ways could we engage technology? How also could you stretch the constraints, boundaries of a medium, of a question, of a prompt, which I think are still themes that are present in my work. And I also became very curious about this idea of portals and how technology might support us in fully creating and immersing ourselves in new realities, which led to this project called Portal Open. And so here I'm really working with laser cut acrylic symbols, Black synthetic hair, fabric, gold wires, chains, things like that. and also symbology. And so in this piece, the braids, for instance, represented a symbol of protection. It's a protective hairstyle, eyes representing some aspect of wisdom, and also the spiral representing energy, cosmos, and the color gold representing sun. I really wanted to know if I could create a tactile map that could open a portal. And I was thinking about what are the affordances of tactile connections, symbology, this idea of time traveling, working with past and present temporalities, memory, and also this idea of future projection. And I went on to continue those ideas in a project called the Black Projections Project. And you can see similar themes here. Like this part looks very similar to the last project, and so I was working with the same symbols from that. But really, I was curious about what a portal mapping device could be, and what that could look like. And so on top of the device, there's this map, and people would use a magnet to navigate that map. And as they move the magnet, different images on the screen would appear. And so I was thinking that this device was able to communicate with people through images, through questions, through memories, providing guidance on how they could embrace alternative ways of knowing that went against linearity. And I also was curious about this idea of desire, and how a desire, like a magnet, is also something that is guiding us, that is bringing us towards new reality. And also this piece, I think, was very important, and a turning point, because it began to introduce some tension that was very prevalent in my work around this time, especially around notions of projection, visibility, and sight. And this is one of my research documents from the time I was reading Fanon, and this idea of the master projector came up. The master having his reality also move forth to be not only his world, but also other people's worlds. And I was thinking about who is allowed to project their ideology onto the world and have it negate the ideologies and beliefs of others. And that question and this tension was really the beginning of feeling this deep discomfort in my work and in my body. And once that creeped in, it was sort of everywhere. And that last point, I was talking about the idea of the ability to project their ideology onto others' world. I think the sociologist John Law really sort of puts that idea in a nice context through this language of the one world, which he states is a world that privileges itself and negates the presence of other worlds. And so that concept was really, really interesting and crucial for me. And I was beginning to think about how those narratives exist within technology, within algorithms, was beginning to go further into thinking about how our devices have also this language of the master and the slave, for instance, and how that's embedded in our technology and our devices and codes. And that was something that was really coming up when I was in an electronics class at the time, when a professor introduced the terminology of master and slave and protocol. And I was the only Black person in that class, and once again was sitting with that tension, and also simultaneously gaslighting myself of like, why does this feel like, am I being dramatic? Why is no one else acknowledging that? But really what was key was that there was something that was coming up in my body, and that was an indicator that there was something more, and that was. And so I went deeper into the feeling, into the information that was being communicated. And that going deeper actually was like in a way of returning back to the source of really questioning what is technology. And so I came back to that question halfway through grad school, actually. And the thing that really brought me there was once COVID happened, the pandemic, the very beginning of it, I found myself really studying plants and like going deeper into learning about plants, herbalism, energy work, and all of these things. And in these spaces, people were also talking about technology, albeit in a very different way than I was encountering in anywhere in my grad program. And so it was like, okay, if this space that some might see as being fundamentally like the opposite of like my grad technology class, we're like talking about plants, there's no computers involved. How then is that technology related to the technology of things like VR, of AR, and all of these emerging technologies that we might be working with in grad programs? And I think it's also interesting that this question of what is technology was actually never even asked in my grad program. And I wonder if there was assumption that we all know what that is, or maybe an assumption that we don't need to know. But going back to that question was so interesting and fruitful for me, particularly because I realized it was way trickier than I expected. And I really began to think and realize that one early form of technology actually, in a way, was enslaved Africans, because I was thinking about the categorization of humans, for instance, and this idea of human, and really the human, I think of it as like the human project, like who is human, who gets to be human, create a hierarchy of people who were human and people who were not human. And also some of those who were not human were likened to be machines. And so I was charting that history as well. And also thinking about women as well. And so earlier forms of computer, this is an image from the 1940s. And these women were mathematicians, were doing calculations by hand and having to program and have the computer work by hand. And so it was before computers could do all the processing like they can do now. Beforehand, it was women who were doing those things. And so there was this interesting putting that into the context of like the early histories of like technology and how people were situated within that. And another way of asking this question, what is technology, is also thinking about what is a function of technology. And I had also around this time come across the work of Ruha Benjamin, who is amazing and does like so many amazing work around technology and really thinking about its connection to race. And so this quote here from Captivating Technology, she says, "A key feature of this work is the understanding that racialized groups are not only the objects of harm and neglect, but that the meaning and power of racial hierarchies are enacted through techno-scientific processes." And so at this point, she's really thinking about how inclusion, or like selective inclusion, selective incorporation of having people be a part of these systems is also a way of maintaining hierarchy. And so I was doing all of this thinking at the time and really thinking about how all these things were connected to the history of technology, how technology is functioning in these harmful ways, and also how I was feeling all of these things within my own body. And all of that brought me closer to this idea of the glitch, which became a big part of my work. And so I began to think of the glitch as, in a way, an error, but also the distance between who I am and who you demand that I be, who I am and who you say that I am, the space between what is seen and what is truly there, a dangerous space. And I was thinking about the effects of visibility and how sometimes visibility can feel like a trap. How so often, for instance, cops can manifest a gun that is not there through this act of projection. And I was really thinking about the glitches, the glitch that can happen on screen, but also glitches that can happen in real life. And as I was thinking about this concept, I was doing these self-glitching processes. And so this is an image where I put it into a hex code editor and was removing code, adding new code, and seeing what manifested through that. And was checking in with my body each time to see what new sensations arose as I was doing that. And I also began to explore the glitch in audiovisual projects, really linking also audio, sound together, and having that impact glitches, having the audio glitch the visual effects, having the visual glitch the audio. And all of these ways were me trying to figure out what is the glitch, what is the glitch feel like? What is the use of a glitch? And at the time of this project, this is called In Pursuit of Black Noise. I was really thinking about the glitch as being what occurs before death, or that which carries you to death. I saw the glitch as mostly a negative thing, and I found myself at this point feeling very hopeless, and there was just an over sort of focus on death. And so this was where I was, and I was stuck in the space for a long time and had to sort of revamp and figure out, okay, is this where I'm going to end? Is this, how does this feel to me? And I really reflected on this project and decided that what if instead of getting rid of the glitch, I asked myself, what does the glitch have to offer? Are there any benefits to the glitch? And as I was asking this question, I came across this piece by Simpada Ranke in Material Matters, Black Radical Aesthetics and the Limits of Visibility. And they introduced this idea of obscurity, of not just visibility, but like this idea of failure, the benefit of being obscure, the benefit of being untamed, illegible, the benefit of refusing. And I was thinking that maybe being illegible, maybe refusing could offer a remedy to capture. And this offered a different sort of way of looking at the glitch, of thinking about what can happen if you are illegible? What does that mean? And this, I began to have a very different relationship to my body. And instead of seeing my body as solely this negative thing, I began to even find that I was placing my body on the screen more, which was something I was absolutely like uncomfortable with beforehand. But my work, I wanted to bring my body back on the screen instead of hiding it from fear of others glitching me, for fear of others projecting their ideas onto me. And so that was an interesting thing that was beginning to happen at the time, this idea of existing with the glitch and working with it, seeing it as its own power. And also I began to really fall more deeply in love with magic. And magic in this context, I'm thinking of it as being defined as what is brought forth through intention and change, the combination of those things, how together they can cause disruption, how together intention and change can create something out of what might look like nothing. And I also was getting further into the idea of time traveling and really thinking about what that is, thinking of storytelling, reading the archives, projecting into the future, embodying the realities we want to see, how all of those are also forms of time traveling, how so much demands that we forget, how remembering is to grieve, and also remembering is to care. And I'm thinking of like how technology, with its endless access to information, how could we use it if instead we use it to remember, to time travel, to tap into our own bodily knowledge? And so this was the space I was in. All these things were beginning to like just bubble up all around me: magic, technology, spiritual practices, earth animism, all of these things. And I still was trying to figure out how they were related. And I came across this definition of technology from John Agar's, which says, technology is the knowledge of how to make things that would otherwise not exist. And that was something that sounded very familiar to me, particularly this idea, related to this idea of conjuring, or how I thought about conjuring. And so conjuring means to make something appear by magic, or as if by magic, to summon, to bring to mind. And I was linking these two things together, technology and conjuring, and really going deeper with that, how those things felt very similar. And also thinking about when a new technology is made available, oftentimes we describe it as being magical. And I think sometimes we do that because there's this fear, or maybe we don't understand it, so it's magic. But I am very interested more so in still having that intention be present, and really working with something intentional instead of from a fear-based place. And I was going deeper, looking into magic, and also came across how the person who created the binary system actually was heavily influenced by Chinese divination systems, and how that influence is embedded also into our technology. And so I was doing all of these research and was realizing that the earth is present in our technology. Our devices are of this earth. They are from the material place that we are operating within. Our devices and the things that we use are also informed by earth-based divination systems. And what does that all mean? There's so many more things that I can say, and I'm checking the time, but something that I really want to end on, I guess, is just this idea. What do we gain by further separating our machines and technology from the earth and from us? How does it inform how we think about them? What drives us to abstract our emerging technologies away from nature, connecting them only in symbolic ways? Think of how many tech terminologies have earth-based and ecological names: Amazon, the web, bug, stream, virus, the cloud. What does such symbolism produce but a distance rather than a closeness? How many times must we hear about how things online aren't truly real, how technology is not natural and at odds with earth-based practices, how nature is something that exists somewhere else away from us that we must travel to? And so I propose that through venturing deeper into cyber witch practices, I'm curious what it could look like if we approach our technology and our world with curiosity, if we reevaluated how we relate to things and approached it from deep listening and informed embodied understanding. How could we build relationships not just with the world around us and other humans, but also other than human beings, with our devices and the technologies we use as being part of the other than human beings and the other than human realm? And so I'll leave with that. Yeah, I'll stop there for now. I think that feels good. And I'm happy to
Wonderful.
chat about anything and talk more with you all.
Thank you so much. You've established quite the framework just now. So I will repeat, anybody please feel free to ask any questions by just unmuting or raising your hands using the Zoom icon, or you can also ask questions through the chat, or you can also send them directly to me and I can ask the question for you. I think I'll start quickly. This is really interesting to hear your journey, and I probably have many questions along the way, but you very much described your journey and kind of finding and then defining your practice and doing work along the way. And I feel like at the end of this, you just described where this practice actually lies. And maybe before that, these are moments of finding that path. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious in your current practice, do you have work that you think does what you're proposing here, which is a new connection between spiritual practices, the earth, emerging technologies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in many ways it was sprinkled in past work here and there, especially with a lot of my sound work. There's a project that I did called Lacuna, and in that project I was really working with my like ancestral archive, but also really trying to connect with ancestors and the ancestral realm through that. I began to learn more about my family and learned about some musicians who were in my family, and was using also their old work in a mix that I made. And so I see that as being one way of trying to connect with ancestors and ancestral realm through technology, and having that be a space where there is a way of engaging with it from like this material sense and like through the body and having that connection. And so I found myself doing things like that. And I think more recently I'm a resident in Culture Hub, and as part of my residency, I started a sort of mini residency where there are a series of events and discussions and collective inquiry around this idea of water as technology. And although I was sort of taking more of a like event planning and curatorial approach to that, that looks very different than a lot of the work that I have been doing. I also see that as an extension of this idea. And I really do feel like a lot of my work is informed by conversation and research and having that collective inquiry. So having spaces where it's not just me thinking about this, but we're like figuring it out in context and community and really like stretching and morphing what that can be is something I see happening more.
Thank you. Can you talk a bit more about the Water as Technology project? Like, what is it? What's the format? What are the projects that came out of it?
Yeah. So it started on April 25th and it's still going until April 5th, but the events have sort of stopped. And so I guess in terms of format, it's categorized or like understood as being an open residency, which I think part of that is in response to like classic resident structures where maybe you like have to apply in order to get permission to study something. And so this is really thinking about how could you expand that format and have more fluidity, also like water of like ways that people can engage where there isn't anything that is mandatory, but there is space for people to learn within others who are with others who are curious, and also space for others to do their own activations and events. And so it was sort of this open format where our main hub was Discord, as well as in-person events. And so we looked at water and its connection to grief, and really thinking about technology as like conjuring, thinking about what can water conjure? And we put that in the context of grief, what can come out of that? And so we did water rituals around grief, somatic workshops where we really engaged our body around water, as well as looked at the history of waterways in New York. I'm really looking at maps and using storytelling maps, charting out the water as a way of understanding what is the water doing now, where is it even, and how might that shift and change over time.
So interesting. Oh,
I just
I
see
guess
it.
I'll read this question real
Yeah.
quick. Yeah. And Nell asks, how do you balance using natural technologies, in quotes, like water and technology, like water and technology, like code and video editing? And do you have a preference for one side, natural or unnatural technology?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think in a way there's sort of like a natural balance that I have. I think I always have felt sort of like forced to choose one or the other. That's been a common theme in all of my life. Like I remember many years ago, I wanted to be a herbalist and like study agriculture and like sustainable practices, but I also wanted to be a filmmaker and I like do all this video art and I didn't understand how those were compatible. So I like picked one because the school that I went to was like maybe good for video, but not good for that other stuff. And so there have been like those tensions and I guess ideas that these things are incompatible and that I have to choose one. And I think more recently I'm learning that you don't have to choose anything over the other. You can do simultaneous things. And a lot of times the things that we're interested in are actually very related in these ways. And I think in the balancing has been figuring out how are these things related, and making connections has been a way of sort of navigating this idea of balance. And I also think I really just like enjoy thinking about many things. And so I I sort of think about like how can water show up in code? How can water show up in video? As like how are all those interrelated? And I think I also approach things like people, like thinking about especially like code, video editing, or any other medium. What how is working with video going to be different than code? How is working with video going to be different than sound? And what things can I do with sound that maybe I can't do with video? And so I really think, not from like a limitation standpoint, but like what can be produced from working with these different mediums, and like what makes sense for what I'm trying to communicate, or what I'm trying to explore, or how I want to work with my body in relationship to those things. And in terms of a preference, I don't think I have a preference between any of those things. And if I do, I think my preferences change very, very often.
I guess I'll read the other question. Hannah asks, what were some surprising finds in that water as technology project?
Yeah. So I sort of like came out with the idea of like water is technology, and I just like put it out there, but I didn't know how that would resonate with people, if that made sense with other people. And so I think the initial surprising thing was how that phrase resonated with people and how people understood it. And there were so many different kinds of people involved. Some who might consider themselves to be creative technologists, and some who like maybe are like herbalists or like environmental scientists, or whatever. And I think each person, one, had so many different ways that they thought about water, and so many ways that they worked with water, which I think I learned so much about water just from talking to other people, but then also connecting it to this idea of technology, really expanded again my view of what technology is and can be. And yeah, I think that that was definitely like an initial surprising thing. Beyond that, I really just really like the format of having this like fluid open space for engagement. And it was a format that I haven't done before. I didn't even know fully what that was going to look like, or how that would be understood. But people really, I think, went with it, and also from what I saw, really like were able to contribute in the ways that felt good. And then I think someone did a workshop on the mapping project that I was talking about, and I just realized how disconnected I am from some of the waters here, and like didn't know that the city is like built on top of rivers, for instance, and how in some buildings you can, the rivers and the streams make themselves present in other ways. Or if you are by like the sewerage lines or drain pipes, you can hear that the water moving, and how that water is not just like around us, but it is also underneath us. And I had no idea about that, and something that I'm very curious about.
Just to follow up on that, I find it so interesting, and I mean, we can talk endlessly just about water as a life giver, water and capitalism, water as a scarce resource. But how did you even come up with it? I think it's so bold that you just coined this term, water as technology, and then run with it, and then also have many others join you in running with it.
Yeah. So I think in my energy work and herbalism practice, I was beginning to shift to think about that from as having like a more of a seasonal focus, because I was sort of like all over the place learning about all the plants and everything. It's just like there's endless things to learn about, and I kind of wanted to like give myself some structure. So at first I was like, what if I began to think about the seasons? And so I started that in the winter. and was really thinking about what makes winter winter, what are the qualities of winter, how are our bodies affected by winter, all of those things. And also was learning a little bit about traditional Chinese medicine, and that was linking winter and the water together. And so that was the beginning of like, there's a seasonal focus, but there also is like this elemental focus. And I began to go deeper into water. And was just sort of like casually like just reading a little bit here and there. And I was experiencing burnt out honestly from grad school, and was really struggling like, what am I going to do for like my final like community engagement as part of my residency. And every idea I just like didn't have like any like a full bodied yes to. And then I went to sleep like right before the deadline. I was supposed to figure out like, what am I gonna do? And I had a dream where people were coming together to just talk about water, and I was like, all right, I guess that's just going to be the thing. And so I really just ran with the dream. um I like talked about it a little bit here and there to people, and it seemed to resonate. And I really wanted to link it to technology because as I was studying it, I was really linking it in that form already, but I never like put it as clear like water as technology as that. And so that was the framing of it, and ran with it and just saw what happened. But yeah, it was from a dream, really.
Hi, I wanted to say something. Hi, thank you for holding space and just like really inviting us into your work. Your work has honestly influenced a lot of my practice here at Parsons. And like, so it's nice to like meet you face to face. And I feel like I first got exposed to your work, like seeing the work that you're doing with Glitch. And I started kind of like grabbing onto the idea of Glitch and Glitch feminism by Legacy Russell and really trying to like I know, show through like ancestral magic, how could I kind of like explore technology? And I've really been exploring technology as like everything. So like it's really expansive. I guess like the question I have is just how did it feel at NYU to kind of like put these things that were really personal out there and like have people kind of like perceive them or like have thoughts about them? I think it's something that like I find is really difficult for me, kind of just like putting my work in spaces where people are not having the same thoughts. So like, what did that feel like?
That's a great question. And also it's nice to meet you. That's so cool. Yeah, I definitely struggled with that, honestly. I remember when so we have like a big sort of like showcase where people from all over are like coming to see the work. And my program at NYU is also very big, and so it's like 100 students, like so many people showing work. It can feel like a science fair that's just like, it's not the most, it doesn't feel like always the most intentional space. And I had the Black Projections project, and someone looked at it and was like, time traveling, like what are you, magic? They just like could not wrap their heads around it. And at first, I think I remember like feeling so down about that. Like people are telling me like the things that I'm learning and that are feel deeply personal, or like not real, or they don't understand them. And I think some moments it was discouraging, but I think for me I felt like I had to keep going further with the idea. And so I really was like, well, I have a full body yes on this. Like this is where I want to continue going. So this is the direction I'm going to keep moving. And it's okay that things don't resonate for everyone. It's hard to make work for everyone, nor do I want to. And I was finding people who it did resonate for, or who were really at the least like asking questions, or like had a question that came up because of the work, really thinking about, well, how does time function? Maybe time isn't linear. Like how do we understand time? I think that is like such a cool takeaway, and I think people can have their own takeaways. And in some ways I like detach from it, and in some ways it's like when things resonate, that is cool. And I also reminded myself that I've only I was only in that grad program for 2 years. And so there is like a whole context of making work and engaging with people that is beyond that. And so I really just like I had to find like references that were like not being communicated about in my program. I also was having to find community outside of it. But the community that was outside of my program was also like really amazing and supportive. And I was finding people who were also engaging with similar themes, and having that outside community and just like really connecting with other people also helped to then help me reintegrate back into my grad program in a way where I had like better boundaries and like understood its limits or the benefits of it in its like very unique way. But it was hard figuring that out beforehand. And then I think engaging with like personal work. I am someone who like loves to like share things and like be very open, and I think that like sharing is like a big part of my own practice. And I think also when I'm engaging with work, I have like my own sort of ways of having protection, like energetic protection and boundaries around it. So I think about that too.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really important to, I guess, like start thinking about like the communities that exist outside of these like academic walls, because this is not the only space.
Mhm.
And I guess I'm also curious about how you've been like healing yourself. So it's like you're putting your body in these spaces and kind of like sharing the stories that are inside of you. Like, how do you balance that with your spiritual practice, like technology and spirit? I'm curious about that.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that probably was the reason why I was beginning to shift into learning more about energy work and herbalism, because it was like, okay, my body, my body hurts, like what's going on? Or like what are other ways that I can be supportive to like just the ways that I'm moving throughout my day, throughout different spaces. And a big part of that was learning about plants and engaging with that. And I was beginning to see like, okay, there are like some plants and things that I use when I'm like about to go on Zoom and be in class for how long, or when I'm about to go to different spaces. And so I was thinking about things like that. And also in energy work programs that I was in, was really learning a lot about just how to protect my own boundaries and like different sort of rituals. And so I think even though I entered into my grad program with this idea of being a cyber witch and the cyber witch practice, I didn't really have a strong practice and foundation myself at the time. But through really embodying that and learning about what that could be, I started to develop my own practices and like own ways of just like navigating the day, own maintenance rituals, and all of those things supported me through the program and also supported how I think about magic rituals and ways that I want to engage with technology, and are also like so supportive now. And also now really focusing on taking a break, not going as fast as I was in grad school because I don't have to.
Thank you.
Yeah, breaks are important. Love a break.
Okay, I think I'll ask one more question, which is, a lot of students listening in are current grad students in their first or second year, and they are also very much thinking about how to create practice after these 2 years. And everything you describe is so expansive and interconnected, but maybe on a very practical level, how do you make work? How do you make it happen? Whether that's organizationally or even economically or socially, or maybe asked differently, what does a typical day look like?
Oh my gosh, like, is there a typical day? I feel
Or
like
maybe not, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I am still at my grad program as like a fellow, which basically means there's like part research and part class support. And so that is like part of my week. It's like half, like very part-time. And so that is like some structure, and I think like having like something that sort of tethers me, either like being there in person or like structuring part of my hours around that has been useful, and it also is supportive still to encouraging like research in the work that I'm doing. And also I'm able to see what people are thinking about now, what grad students are, what technologies are using, how are they thinking about technology. And so that still puts me in the context where I'm really honed in on what people are thinking about. And so that's like one part of my life, and I guess of how I'm like structuring doing this work. Um, and I've also done residencies. I, right after grad program, entered into a residency. I think really I wish I had given myself a little bit of a break. But I think now that I've sort of figured out how I want to navigate residencies, especially if they're like various levels of funded or not, I like have a better idea of like, maybe I don't want to take on these many things that don't have quite a budget, or this is like what my capacity is. And so I will say like maybe the first year afterwards, you are sort of figuring out the boundaries and like what makes sense and budgets and all of those things. Really like saving every application that you work on. I have like Notion where like all my application responses are there. And so it gets like a lot easier to apply to things. And also to just see like past projects that I pitched, and also just like talking to people about the things that you do and like the things that you're excited about, even if it's not a full fleshed out idea or you don't know which direction you want to go to, I think has been the most useful thing. I talk to people a lot who maybe are like shy about sharing their work, or they like don't want to share until it's like fully figured out. And I think that a lot of my projects like were just like this one small idea that I started to like research a little bit about, but really like what informed it was just talking to people about it. And not only do you get more inspiration and references, you're like able to build this connection through just like being curious and sharing that curiosity with other people. And it also brings in energy to that work that I think can like, if you are like talking to people who you feel like supported by, that can like really like elevate work and like the energy around it, even if it's like you don't end up posting it somewhere, like showcasing it somewhere. And so I think I'm always thinking about how to invite energy to something that I'm doing so that it doesn't get stagnant, and also so that I don't get bored. um, and also letting things direct you to places that are surprising. I've been surprised by a lot of the things that I've made. Like there was a point where I was never going to make video work again because I studied that in undergrad, hated it. But then that's like a big part of the work that I do now.
Cool. I'm going to ask Erica's question. Hi, Sai. Thanks so much for your beautiful and provocative work and talk. I appreciate also how you are thinking about breaking binaries, which is interesting how code is so based in this. Can you elaborate more on these ideas?
Yeah, I definitely can. So I think with like thinking of the binaries and like how binary is like introduced into code, like binary thinking, but also like how binary like thinking is like forced into a lot of the ways that we have to work. I think one way that I've like approached it is really sitting and thinking about, well, how are some things working? How is some technology working? How is binary thinking already a part of some of the things that we're doing? And then so getting that like sort of like understanding and context, and then thinking about, well, how can we shift that thinking? Is there space to shift? Where is there space to shift? How can I shift it in the things that I'm doing? What are ways that other people have been involved in the shift? And I think another way of thinking about this is like poetry and like language and like words. I relate to like words, for instance, as being like very gooey, is how I describe words. How one word, you can ask like someone to define one word, and like each person will have their whole definition and understanding and like attachments to it. And that was something that used to stress me out about language, where I was like, language doesn't make sense because like I can say something and people think I'm saying something else, and that was completely like stressful. But I also was like, because it's gooey, that means you can stretch the boundaries of that thing too. And there is like a way that you can work with that. And so I also think about that with technology, which I think was sort of why I was really like interested in asking myself, well, what is technology? So that I can have some rootedness in how has this word been defined? And then how do others define it outside of maybe a traditional definition? And then how do I want to define it? And so I really approach every sort of like technology and thinking like that as something where you can really stretch boundaries of it. And there is like usually like a tiny opening that you can expand and stretch it and move beyond what it might traditionally tell you to do or what you think that you have to do with that.
I love this, and a great way to end. Thank you for the question also. Maybe one last thing, you mentioned so many books and texts and references. If there's one text for us to look at, which one would it be? If it
Ooh.
can be reduced to one.
That's tricky. One text. I feel like everyone should definitely read Glitch Feminism, but a text that I didn't actually mention would be Caliban and the Witch, which I feel like was really influential to my work. So I'll leave y'all with those two.
Okay, amazing. Thanks so much for being with us.
Yes, thank you all. This was so great. And yeah, people can reach out to me if you have any more questions or curiosities. So thank you all so much.
Thanks so much. Thank you.